What you are seeing now is not the world we once knew. This is a timeline that has been completely rewritten, where history has taken its darkest turn. It all began when one of humanity's most pivotal events ended in a completely different way. April 30th, 1945. There was no red Soviet flag flying atop the Reichstag in Berlin. There were no cheers of victory, because Adolf Hitler did not commit suicide. And the Third Reich, along with the entire Axis, never fell. In this universe, humanity's darkest nightmare has become reality. After sweeping through France in the summer of 1940, Nazi Germany quickly turned its gaze westward, toward the island nation of Britain, still standing defiantly alone. Hitler believed that once Britain was subdued, the path to global domination would be open. But unlike France, which collapsed swiftly and without much resistance, the British, under the leadership of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a man of unyielding resolve, swore to fight to the end, to fight on the beaches, in the villages, in the fields, and in the skies. To defeat Britain, the Germans understood that the sea was the final barrier, and to cross it, they first had to command the skies. For at that moment, the Royal Navy was the most powerful naval force on Earth, vastly superior to Germany's Kriegsmarine in every aspect except submarine warfare. Hitler knew that an invasion could not succeed without absolute air superiority. And so, in this timeline, he ordered the Battle of Britain to begin 3 weeks earlier than it did in recorded history. That single decision changed everything. When the Luftwaffe launched its assault, the island of Britain had not yet recovered from its earlier losses. Airfields were still incomplete, radar stations unfinished. The morale of both the military and the public was not yet ready for the storm of fire to come. Following the new directive, Hermann Göring ordered the Luftwaffe to concentrate all forces on military targets, destroying supply lines, burning fuel depots, and devastating airfields and aircraft factories. The sole objective, to completely cripple the Royal Air Force RAF, neutralize the Dowding defense system, and pave the way for Operation Sea Lion. For those unfamiliar, the Dowding system was the world's first fully integrated network combining electronics, radar, anti-aircraft weaponry, and fighter aircraft. It turned Britain's skies into a vast electronic fortress and was a decisive factor behind the Royal Air Force's victory over the Luftwaffe in 1940. But in this timeline, that system could not function effectively. The Royal Air Force, the RAF, was now flying blind. They could neither detect nor intercept the German bomber formations flooding across the skies. With each passing day, the defenders were ground down, burning away an inferno unleashed by the Luftwaffe. On the other side, the Germans suffered losses too, but far fewer than in actual history. Their reduced pilot and aircraft attrition gave Hitler a decisive advantage when he later turned east against the Soviet Union. In London, had Winston Churchill been assassinated before Operation Sea Lion began, the outcome would have been even easier. In this alternate scenario, the new Prime Minister, Viscount Halifax, a man inclined toward appeasement, was forced to tell the British people that to avoid an unthinkable massacre, the nation had no choice but to negotiate a conditional surrender. Hitler appeared merciful. He demanded no territory, no colonial occupation, only that London disband its armed forces and lift the economic blockade. In return, Germany would release all British prisoners of war. When the United States declared it would remain neutral, Hitler immediately recalled the entire U-boat fleet from the North Atlantic, removing any pretext for American intervention in Europe. The world entered a state of cold peace. Trade embargoes were lifted, and Germany's maritime commerce revived. Cargo ships once again carried nickel, tungsten, rubber, oil, and machinery, the lifeblood of a resurging German industry. Even occupied France was permitted to import coal and raw materials from Britain to rebuild its economy, under Berlin's strict supervision, of course. For several years, Europe seemed calm. Small uprisings were crushed before they could grow, suppressed by puppet governments unwilling to challenge the Third Reich. Then, as the bitter winter settled in, German troop trains quietly departed the French coast, tens of thousands of soldiers moving eastward. A new campaign awaited them. a campaign that would decide the fate of the world. The summer of 1941, after subduing all of Western Europe, Hitler unleashed his decisive strike, Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in human history. More than 4 million soldiers, hundreds of thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft surged across the Soviet border in a sea of smoke and fire. In the first few months, the Wehrmacht, the armed forces of Nazi Germany, achieved a string of stunning victories. Names like Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states fell one after another into German hands. Oil fields, industrial zones, and fertile lands became the new lifeblood of the Third Reich. Millions of Soviet prisoners were captured, giving Hitler an immense supply of forced labor and a near-limitless pool of resources. But the crown jewel of his ambition remained Moscow. In true history, that city was where the Red Army launched its counteroffensive, turning the tide of the entire war. Yet in this timeline, history does not repeat itself. No longer divided by a Western Front, since Britain had surrendered, Hitler concentrated the full power of the Wehrmacht in the east. There were no U-boats hunting in the Atlantic, and no fear of provoking the United States as in the previous World War. Every gun, every drop of fuel, every machine of the Third Reich now pointed toward Moscow and Leningrad. This offensive came like a storm of steel. Moscow fell. Leningrad was erased. The Red Army was driven back to the Ural Mountains, a frozen wilderness where even the evacuated factories no longer had enough fuel to operate. With no supply lines and no Western aid, the Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse. The iron that had once carried them through Stalingrad was now crushed by brutal reality. They were fighting alone. No allies, no aid, no hope. Meanwhile, in southern Europe, the balance of power shifted as well. In our timeline, Mussolini's Italian forces suffered humiliating defeats in Greece and North Africa, forcing Hitler to intervene. But in this world, with Britain erased from the map of war, there was no one left to stand in the way. Italy, with modest German support, easily dominated the entire Mediterranean, from Tripoli to Athens, from Sicily to the Suez Canal. And in the Far East, the Empire of Japan never attacked Pearl Harbor. There were no sirens in Hawaii, no bombs falling on the Pacific Fleet. Instead, Tokyo joined hands with Berlin, forging the most terrifying pincer in human history. By the end of 1941, as German forces crossed the Volga, Japanese ground and air units surged in from Siberia and the Soviet Far East. From both east and west, the Soviet Union was caught in a vice with no escape. The Lend-Lease supply routes from the United States were completely severed, and the cargo ships once bearing aid could only turn back in despair. The summer of victory had turned into a season of annihilation. The Soviet bear grew weaker by the day. Triumph over a giant like the USSR only fueled Japan's imperial ambitions further. From Siberia flowed a torrent of resources, fuel, rubber, ore, and forced labor, giving Tokyo the means to expand its reach across Asia. In 1942, Japanese forces struck the Dutch East Indies and neighboring territories. They seized vital oil fields needed to sustain their growing military presence across the occupied lands. With the Soviet front secured and reinforced in the Far East, Japan and Hitler sat down together to chart a new strategy for their twin empires. Berlin pledged to share raw materials whenever Tokyo required. The joint strategic objective: keep the United States out of the war for one more year. If America could be held at bay for that crucial span, the Axis powers' dreams of global dominance would be realized. Without a direct attack to provoke it, Washington would not be spurred into action. The American public would not accept the sacrifices of a world war. No Pearl Harbor. No outrage demanding vengeance. The U.S. fleets and soldiers will remain bound on two distant shores, while the Communist alliance lost its final glimmer of hope. World War II ended with the Axis triumphant. Asia, Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean all fell under their control. With Lebensraum, living space, secured, mass resettlement began. German citizens moved into newly conquered lands. Peoples deemed inferior were subjected to persecution, deportation, and forced labor. Systematic extermination followed, as the Aryan racial utopia took shape through blood and fire. Tens of millions of Slavs were slaughtered in the decade after the war. The Third Reich, now unchallenged on the continent, turned inward, consolidated its empire. Puppet governments were installed across Europe. Hitler focused on assimilating the annexed territories, erasing native cultures, rewriting history, and enforcing ideological uniformity. Any remaining resistance was crushed with merciless violence. The plan to partition the former Soviet Union was carried out. Within a few years, the Axis completed its occupation, dividing the vast land into spheres of influence and launching a brutal campaign of decommunization. Man to man, home to home, every citizen memorized the Führer's commandments. From classrooms to factories to radio broadcasts, the Mannheim anthem echoed, the chorus of absolute faith and total indoctrination. Across the empire, the Nazi military police enforced racial purity with unprecedented zeal, not only upon enemies, but upon their own citizens. Children born with disabilities or deformities were forcibly sterilized to preserve the purity of Aryan blood. The mentally ill, the handicapped, and wounded veterans unable to work were sent to special research institutes where medicine and murder became one. In our timeline, military historian Gerhard Weinberg once said, "The defeat of Nazi Germany saved countless elderly, disabled people, and tens of thousands of war veterans from death at the hands of their own government." But in this universe, where the Third Reich never fell, all those people vanished. No miracles, only numbers erased from history. Ideal couples were carefully selected to breed the new, pure Aryan generation. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed children were raised as children of the Reich, while thousands of Slavic children were taken from their parents to be Germanized in special re-education camps. The media lay entirely in the hands of Joseph Goebbels, the man known as the architect of the perfect lie. Every day he appeared before the public, praising the greatness of the Führer, painting a picture of a prosperous and humane empire. But behind the curtain of propaganda stood a vast machine that crushed both truth and humanity. Foreign journalists were monitored around the clock. Every report, image, and statistic was meticulously censored. The world was allowed to see only what Hitler wanted them to see, a Europe glowing with light, a land of scientific progress and miraculous achievements built by scientists who, unbeknownst to all, worked inside human experimentation camps. Once Europe was unified, Germany began to feel confined. Hitler's ambition knew no end. From Berlin, the Führer's gaze turned toward the far side of the Atlantic, to what he called the democratic cesspool, a chaotic land of mixed races that, in his view, required purification. The leadership of the Third Reich believed that sooner or later, a clash between the New Order and the free world was inevitable. And when that day came, Germany and Japan, the twin pillars of global fascism, would again form a crushing pincer, this time tightening around the United States from both the Pacific and the Atlantic, just as they once did to the Soviet Union. Yet before that could happen, the Axis needed to maintain post-war order and secure its new territories. As novelist Philip K. Dick described in The Man in the High Castle, the world after an Axis victory was divided in an orderly and parallel manner. The Empire of Japan ruled over the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, encompassing India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the entire South China Sea. Nazi Germany controlled all of Europe, Western Asia, and Siberia. The two powers traded resources. Japan supplied coal and iron from Siberia, while Germany provided advanced technology and synthetic fuels to Tokyo. In that world, the Japanese dominated the Eastern Hemisphere, while the Germans held the West. Two colossal fascist machines operating in perfect, ruthless synchrony, a cold, orderly, and utterly inhuman world. Even under American blockade, Tokyo did not falter. Backed by the global trade network of the Third Reich, Japan lacked nothing. Minerals, steel, rubber, oil, all in abundance. Its assets could not be frozen. The Japanese war machine continued to run, efficient, mechanical, and merciless. But for those living under conquest, prosperity was nothing but a lie. Millions under Japanese rule, endure a regime of brutality and oppression, poisoned, starved, enslaved, or sold into servitude. Most of them were Chinese, between 5 and 10 million lives erased in the darkness of the rising Sun Empire. Across Europe, Benito Mussolini sat in his Roman palace, enjoying his new sphere of influence, stretching from the Middle East and the Mediterranean to Balkans, and even parts of France's Riviera. Italian fascism survived in a milder form than Nazism. Mussolini avoided mass extermination. Instead, he chose targeted assassinations and political suppression to preserve the illusion of a stable and benevolent regime. Across the Atlantic, America was not the same. In 1940, Franklin D. Roosevelt lost the election, surrendering the presidency to Republican candidate Wendell Willkie. After Britain was forced into peace negotiations, Americans lost faith in the idea of protecting allies or saving the world. The United States turned inward. Under Willkie's leadership, Washington chose a path of moderation and isolation, steering clear of all global conflicts. Industry continued to grow, but it never ignited. There was no longer the flame of a wartime economy. Through the 1940s, America remained a sleeping superpower, wealthy but alone. From 1942 to 1950, Washington quietly expanded its armament programs. Defensive bases sprouted along the Atlantic coast. But when war never came, vigilance slowly gave way to isolationist complacency. Don't provoke Berlin became the unspoken rule of American politics. Across the ocean, however, Nazi Germany had entered the nuclear age. Through its vast network of military research institutes, the Reich successfully developed intercontinental ballistic missiles armed with nuclear warheads, weapons capable of erasing entire cities with the press of a single button. The global balance of power tilted decisively toward empire. The threat from Berlin pushed Washington to the brink of war, a crisis more severe than any since the American Civil War. Under immense pressure, the United States was forced into its own technological arms race. With the aid of German and Canadian scientists who had emigrated in the 1920s and 1930s, America built its own nuclear weapons, establishing a fragile equilibrium of deterrence. By the early 1950s, the United States began rallying the nations of the Western Hemisphere. Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. A new coalition was born. The American Alliance created to counterbalance the twin giants of Germany and Japan that ruled the rest of the world. But the new world was far from peaceful. Alongside trade and political influence, fascist ideology began seeping into South America, taking root in societies already unstable and volatile. It spread like a political tumor, and soon a new Nazi party emerged in Latin America, preaching Hitler's teachings and proclaiming that the age of the superior race has not ended. When these extremist movements began operating openly in North America, the White House was forced to act. Massive counter-operations were launched across the continent, declaring fascist sympathizers enemies of the state. Though nominally protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, free speech advocates across the Americas soon realized that freedom existed only in times of peace. Before long, the American Alliance, led by the United States, began to mirror the very tactics of Washington's vigilance. And so, a new Cold War ignited, not between democracy and communism, but between the Third Reich and the Western Hemisphere. Back in Europe, decades under the iron fist of Nazi Germany had reshaped the entire old continent. Germany stood as the absolute center of power, surrounded by puppet governments. Britain, Italy, Spain, France, Scandinavia, all mere satellites orbiting Berlin. Europe was peaceful, but it was the peace of the victor, a peace built upon concentration camps, machine guns, and propaganda. The new order was governed by a rigid racial hierarchy, where the worth of a person was measured by the percentage of Aryan blood in their veins. The purer the blood, the greater the privilege. Those of mixed descent could live, but never truly exist as citizens. If you're a fan of Harry Potter, this might sound familiar, for Voldemort's obsession with pure blood was a distorted echo of Adolf Hitler's ideology within the wizarding world. J.K. Rowling never hid that truth. Alongside racial hierarchy came a holy war against religion. Hitler viewed the Catholic Church as the seed of rebellion, the most dangerous ideological enemy of all. Christian churches, synagogues, and mosques all were closed, demolished, or converted into temples of the Führer. The Gestapo and SS hunted down priests, rabbis, and imams. Some were publicly hanged. Others sent to labor camps for faith re-education. Over generations, Hitler's doctrine replaced the Bible. Citizens of the Reich knew only fascism, and the only scripture they were allowed to read bore the title Mannheim, the ideological handbook of the Führer himself. But no empire lasts forever. With the rise of the digital revolution and global telecommunications, the first whispers of Nazi and Japanese war crimes began to leak through packets of data. From the Americas, truth spread like wildfire. The United States, wielding technological and intelligence power, secretly funded resistance movements in Germany's satellite states. From Poland to France, from Yugoslavia to Scandinavia, the torches of rebellion were lit once again. What began as rumor became a rallying cry, and soon evolved into a revolution sweeping across Europe. Berlin answered with repression, but the more violently it struck back, the fiercer the flames of resistance burned. In the end, the Third Reich began to rot from within. By the 1990s, nationalist liberation movements erupted in Russia, China, India, and Southeast Asia. Guerrilla forces drove the Japanese out of their colonies, ending the empire of the rising sun. Cornered and desperate, in 2001, Nazi Germany launched a wave of terrorist attacks, including the infamous September 11th, designed to spread fear and blame the United States. But that act awakened a different America, stronger, united, and no longer forgiving. There was no war on terror. Instead, humanity began the war on Nazism. As Germany faced enemies both foreign and domestic, uprisings exploded across Europe. The resistance reclaimed Britain and France, advancing toward Berlin. From across the ocean, the American alliance, the United States, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico crossed the Atlantic to join the fight. Meanwhile, from the east, a reborn Russian army led a coalition of Asian nations westward. After 10 years of bloodshed, the two forces, East and West, met on the banks of the Elbe River. The fascist flag was torn down, and Nazism was finally buried in the ashes of its own making. By 2022, Europe and the world had been reborn, but the scars of that dark age still burned deep within humanity's memory. A new global order emerged, one of technology, freedom, and the lingering shadow of new conflicts to come. And the question still echoes, what if Hitler had won? What chain of reactions would have shaped that world? And would humanity have the courage to reclaim its freedom once again?